welcome to the Reluctant Agilist. Today we're going to talk all about trouble, and Richard Brew is here to help us get out of it. So Richard, thank you for taking time out of your afternoon.
David, thank you for having me.
Richard is also a longtime old school wizened PMP who is working with Agile as well, but Richard focuses on troubled projects. So that's kind of where we're going to start in a few minutes. But Richard, would you mind giving these folks a little bit about your background before we jump in?
Sure. Name is Rich Brew. I've been in business for 48 years. The brunt of my career is General Electric and their plastics division, which is where I picked up a lot of my project management skills and training before I got certified. I currently have my own company called True North PMP Consulting, where I work with small to medium-sized companies to help them improve their project management and new product development and commercialization processes.
Okay. And I know you focus on troubled projects. So can you talk a little bit about how that part of your business works?
Yes, I usually get a phone call or I get called into small to medium-sized companies when they're experiencing some product friction or project issues, whether that be it's over budget, it's over schedule, projects are not delivering all their deliverables, common stuff. And where they've existed all their internal resources to try to figure out root cause, but they're just stuck and they need someone to come in and put another set of eyes on it and to help them figure out, okay, here's the bottleneck. How do we fix this bottleneck? How do we move forward so that the client and their customer meet all expectations?
Okay. This is going to sound a little sarcastic, but I feel like when I face those situations, I walk in and they're taking a flamethrower to their hair and they're going, my hair's on fire. And I'm saying, yes, if you put the flamethrower down, it won't be on fire anymore. And they're like, I don't understand.
Yeah,
You feel like you walk in and it's like super obvious.
you do. And, a majority of the time I tell them this is a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah.
You didn't have to shoot yourself. I mean,
And you
let
can
us get to
stop
this
shooting
point.
yourself whenever you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's been a big transition in project management in general, I'd say over the past 10 to 15 years. There was, way back in the day, a switch from the more prescriptive approach to an agile approach. That's gone through a lot of different iterations. And I feel like we've hit a point where the problem has shifted a little. And I'm curious if you're seeing some kind of common failure patterns crop up right now.
Yeah, the ones that I see the most of comes down to the beginning of a project. For instance, I have clients that are strictly waterfall,
Mhm.
and they'll follow the cookie cutter plan that you would see in the PMBOK about how you plan a project. And
Yeah.
certain things I think they still miss. The big one to me is scope. Uh, they
Okay.
don't they don't nail it down tight enough, and that's where a lot of the self-inflicted wounds begin.
Okay.
And when I work with a client, I have my approach. And the first thing when I look at scope is, well, what does the customer want? What's in scope? And
Okay.
then I say, what is out of scope? And has this been committed to a piece of paper
Right.
that you and your client will sign and sign off on before we even get to a project chart or a project plan? That's the first thing. Because if you don't lock that down in the front end, it's just going to be like cancer all the way through the project. When you get to
Right.
the end, you're going to go, yeah, I didn't get what I wanted. Well, you didn't define what you wanted well enough up front.
Yeah.
The second thing I think they miss is risk planning. Now, a
Okay.
lot of the clients I walk into, have you got a risk plan? Yes, I do. They'll tell me the risk.
Yeah.
Then I'll go, well,
There's a risk we might not deliver on time, in scope, and on budget.
yeah. It's like, well, what would trigger that risk? Well, what do you mean? Well, I like plastic injection molders. Well, I knew that the price of steel is going up. Well, what was the trigger? I mean, if you know the price of tool steel is going up, if that's the trigger, why didn't you have your finger near that trigger so you have an
Yeah.
implementation plan, right? So they do planning. I'm not saying they don't, but they don't take it further out, which is what's going to trigger it, what is a firm response to that, and
Yeah.
who's going to own it? Because if I'm the project sponsor, I may not own it. You may own it. Who's going to own addressing this risk?
So I want to park on this topic for a second because I am right there with you in that I think this is something that people have lost focus on, I'd say over the past 15 years. And it's also where, like, when people ask me, should I still get a PMP? I'm always like, you should, because this is one of those things you learn that saying, well, that might happen. That's not enough. You need to have trigger points, response plans, mitigation strategies, people owning different things, like all that stuff. But there's nobody sitting around like a project manager would going, well, that's going to break. I mean, that's a
Exactly.
mindset shift.
Exactly. And a lot of these smaller companies, that lies within the engineering department because they don't have a PMP or someone who's a project manager,
Right.
and they approach it traditionally. Well, this is how we've done it all along. Great, but the market is changing. The supply chain, the supply chain is changing. You need to be planning for this stuff up front because if that risk comes into your living room, you basically are. You talked about the flamethrower earlier. Now, flames
Yeah.
in your face. Now, you better have a plan.
Got ugly. Well, how much there's a part of me that wants to lay the blame for that at the feet of Agile because if my focus is we're going to learn as we go. So all that stuff that I would have done up front, all that tightening of scope or risk categorizing and stuff, cataloging, I wouldn't do that in something like Scrum because I'd say, well, it'll appear and then we'll respond when it appears. But if we're using our hybrid approach to hide those things under the rug until they explode, and then we're like, oh, it makes it easier to not act like the sky is falling, I think.
That's correct. And whether you're doing straight waterfall, hybrid, or agile, you cannot ignore risk. Risk will derail you faster than you can fall off your chair. So, what I tell my clients is you cannot, I don't care how you want to approach your project. If you are not clearly defining what the risk could be, what's going to trigger them, what your
Yeah.
response is, your flank is open. And if you choose to leave your flank open, you will get attacked.
Okay. So even on, I mean, and I think some agile teams do this. Even on an agile team, you'd want to have somebody who is taking a more pessimistic doesn't feel like the right word, but I always describe it as a project manager. It's not the glass is half empty or full. It's a fragile object full of liquid that will fall to the floor, shatter, and someone's going to walk in here with bare feet. I have to go get band-aids.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
that's
No,
how
I would agree to
we
that.
learn to think.
I would
Uh,
agree to that.
which is painful for the people around us, but for me, it makes me feel a lot safer.
You're correct.
What do you think is one really common thing that people? I mean, are those the two main things? Is the scoping and the risk that are the
The scoping and the risk. The other thing that I coach my clients on is the budgeting aspect of things.
okay?
I see a pattern where some of the smaller, medium sized they're going in a little light on budget. What I found, I have recently a client that said, "Well," I said, "How did you come to this number?" Well, I went into ChatGPT, I explained what my
Yeah,
project was, and it said I should be able to do this for X amount of dollars. I said, "Okay, think of that as the ideal condition from and getting an answer from someone who's nothing about your business, nothing about your supply chain, nothing about how you're set up to do your business." So, I said, "You really need to take what you were told and then you need to go back to your team and get them involved to do a bottoms up or something because that number is ideal state and ideal state is not going to happen here."
yeah. I feel like every time people say, "Well, I opened up ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever," unless they already know how to do the thing that they're getting the AI to do, it's really scary.
It is because a lot of these people that are using it are just plugging in what they want, a question without all the qualifiers around that question. And
Yeah,
even then getting all those qualifiers and that question in there, that's just one data point. That should not be the sole data point. You've got to go back into your organization now and say, does this one data point even correlate anywhere roughly compared to a similar project that we've done here that I can remotely trust this number?
yeah.
I don't see people trying to make that connection again.
So it almost sounds like, and maybe this is a thing too. So I feel like a project manager spends a lot of time thinking about those things, worrying about those things, making sure they're not going to get caught. Because every time you get pantsed on something like that, like why is the budget like this? You're like, I don't know, it's what the software said. You learn really quickly that you can't do that, and it's almost like, in my opinion, our project managers are not taught to do that. I don't know if they're taught to do that anymore. I don't see that happening anymore. Do you?
Not in total. I mean, when I got my 12, 15 years ago when I got my
What
PMP.
edition of the PMBOK was it?
Oh God, 4?
Okay, I
I
was on
think we're up
3, so we're in the same zone.
yeah, so I
Yeah,
think we're up we're at 8.
8, yeah, the new one's 8, yeah.
So, everything was the test to me was based on what the PMBOK wanted you to answer on that
Right,
test. So it was very mechanical. It's like when I went to college and I took biology. What the book said, you put on the piece of paper, you got the grade, right?
yeah,
I think what we're discussing here, these are things a project manager has to learn and pick up very quickly because we have the framework, but that's just the framework.
right,
Within that framework, you have to color it. And by color it, I mean you have to figure out, this may be my framework, but I have to dig deeper now on cost or schedule or scope. This is what really matters.
right,
Framework's just there to help me think a little bit.
okay. So is it a failure of process or people when you see it happen?
I think it's more people. When I talk to clients about project management, I tell them it's one third common sense, it's one third logic, and it's one third process discipline. The common sense is you know what you want to do, why you want to do it, and what the result should be. That's good.
Yeah,
The logic is how am I going to get from point A to point B?
okay,
Okay, so that's your plan. The process discipline is playing the plan. And again, the plan is based on a framework. You have to color that framework, as I've said, with what is the ultimate scope here?
yeah,
What is the budget? What is the schedule? And that's part of learning. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes as an early project manager. I'm sure we all do when we start out. But through that learning, you figure out this is how I really need to consider cost. This is how I really need to consider risk. This is how I need to consider quality. All the things that we find in the PMBOK, it's just the
yeah.
framework, but you have to be astute enough to start to color it.
So there's this voice in my head because I'm a CST as well. The agile voice is going, "Oh my God, it's so old school and so restrictive and so waterfally and controlling, and we're going to learn and evolve together." And I think that that's right. But I also think that if you don't have all the things you just described, if there isn't somebody thinking about that, you're putting everybody at risk. So you don't have to always listen to that voice. But I think having that voice in the background, somebody there who's watching that stuff, who's thought about that stuff and advocates for that stuff, it just creates a much safer space.
Yes, it does. And I think, yes, as a people or process, my goal is to help my customers become more sustainable in what they do, whether it's agile, waterfall, or hybrid. And what I deal with the leadership of these companies, because they're the ones that call guys like you and I in,
Yeah.
is I help them to understand the fact that if you want to become sustainable and we're better that you do, you have to be, you have to have some diligence, some governance, some diligence that when
Okay.
you start projects, because you and I, for CEOs or COOs, and we're asking for these projects to be done, we have a fiduciary and a personal responsibility to the people that we're entrusting with this to provide them that guidance. We have to
Right.
be smart enough to provide that governance and guidance because you're ultimately the one that will pay the price, not the project manager of the team.
Yeah. That's a big part of it too. Okay. So I know that when you go into companies, you do assessments and you look at how they're practicing whatever their management process is for projects. Would you mind kind of walking through how those assessments
Sure.
go real quick?
Sure. If I'm dealing with a client that is primarily waterfall, I have put together a system where I go through each of the elements in waterfall project management. So I start with I start with governance first.
Okay.
Do you have any governance here? How do you run your projects? And I try to extract from the leadership and the workers why is this governance? How do you do this? Then I take right down the list. I talk about scope and how scope got together. I talk about how you do the budget. And I have a tick list of questions that I ask, and there's a grading system. And at the end of the assessment, I go right down. I say, okay, bottom line is this is where you're deficient. This is where you're very good. Let's not throw the baby